Disposable vapes, as of June the 1st next year, are going to be disposed of permanently. You can't get them anymore. But millions of kids are still going to be hooked. So what's to stop them simply buying the refillable versions?
I don't think anything will. And I think, in a way, it won't have much effect. Certainly when I was an MP, I was very against this sort of legislation because I didn't think it would have... Well, I don't think it has the effect. I mean, the thing that we proposed was also a ban on smoking for people who were born after the 1st of January 2009. And it seemed to me that was totally unenforceable.
Really?
And I had that view as a Member of Parliament. And I still have that view because you're going to get, in that particular instance, you're going to get a point where, you know, it's easy enough to distinguish between a 16-year-old and a 20-year-old, possibly. But when people are in their 30s, it's very hard to do that. And you're essentially saying, oh, well, you're going to have to show your passport and proof of identity. Now, people think it'll have been phased out before then, but then why not just ban it? And so I think that this particular move also would be very difficult to enforce. And as you pointed out, people will just use the refillable versions anyway.
Well, apparently, the Reef... I don't know much about vaping. I used to smoke like a chimney, but I managed to stop without using vapes. But apparently, it's the appearance of the disposable vapes which is so appealing to kids, isn't it?
So I think this is a really, really good move. I mean, there was a report just a couple of weeks ago saying that the number of really young kids who are vaping in school, kind of age 10, 11, and we do not know the damage that it does to young people's lungs. And one of the things that makes it really, really attractive to these... and their kids, they're children, they're not young people, they are children. If you think about your 9-year-old vaping, it's because these single disposable vapes, they look like sweeties, and the flavours, they're packaged up like they look like sweeties. The flavours are like they're like kind of sweets for kids. So I think sometimes the view that, you know, Kwasi would take is that, you know, you can't ban anything. It's a much more libertarian view. I take a very, very different view. I think sometimes public health interventions are really, really, really important.
But the issue here is that you may drive people to using the refillable ones. And if it is damaging, essentially you're just shifting from one...
Well, why don't we see what happens?
Because I think I'm the only person that's vaped here. I'm going to butt in.
Vaping expert.
I've been agonising. Susanna Reid morning about
talking about vaping correspondent.
Because the last thing I want to do, I'm not the vaping correspondent, is in any way sanction it, you know, because I don't now. But my experience was, after Billy was born, I did smoke before. I was craving going back to smoking, didn't want to, and a friend of Aisha's and I, Gloria, said, have you heard about these things called vapes? So it was about 15 years ago, early adopter. And they were the refillable ones. They were like a thin iron, and I thought it was amazing because it didn't smell. At that point, you could do it anywhere. I think it must be like smoking in the 70s. You don't have to stand outside. And everybody said it was better for you. And I did feel much better. Like, I didn't have a cough or anything like that. Right. I didn't smoke.
And you got your nicotine hit?
Got the nicotine hit, yeah. Exactly. I then gave up, just before I went to the jungle, actually, gave up completely. And I've used sort of like chewing gum and things like that since. It's great when I get a craving. And then the end of just before the summer, I think we had some props in here or something ridiculous. And I picked it up and I was instantly addicted, like beyond anything. And I couldn't believe it. And it made me realise how particularly those disposable ones are so addictive, because if you're a kid, you're not going to buy a big, expensive refillable thing. They're passing them around all over the place. You have one puff. And of course, I can remember Derek, funnily enough, saying, when I said, oh, I think this is good, because he hated smoking in all forms, he said, listen, it took 200 years to discover tobacco was bad for you. These are going to be bad for you. And they're so easy to do, and they deliver such a hit. So I don't know that it's a solution to ban the vapes ones, but it is everywhere.
So, as someone who was addicted to nicotine...
oh, my God, I can't believe I'm talking about this.
And so was I, but through cigarettes, I know what it's like.
My children are watching, this is not a sanction.
No. Yeah. But as someone who was addicted to nicotine...
And hated myself for it.
But you were, nevertheless, against your will, as it were. Do you think that children, when these things are no longer... the disposables are no longer available next summer, do you think that they will, because they're addicted, save up their pocket money and buy the more expensive disposable
Well, that is interesting, because they are now hooked. But it will, I think, make it harder for the 10-year-olds to start.
I think this is really important in terms of if you're an older sort of teenager or you're an adult, do what you want, right? But this is really about targeting those, and you hear this from head teachers. There was a massive report just a couple of weeks ago about head teachers in primary schools saying we've got kind of 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds smoking. This is what this is aimed at, because it's much easier to go in if you're a kid. You can pull your money, you can go in, you can get one of the things. They look like a packet of Chewits,
and they share. Don't make you sick. If you've ever tried a cigarette, you have to be quite dedicated. You want to vomit the first time you try a cigarette. But with vapes, you don't.
And these flavours, they're literally... I think we have to be really careful. They're not marketed at people like Quasi or whatever. They're marketed at children. The colouring is like a packet of Chewits or something like that. It looks like a sweet shop. So I think we've got to be really, really careful about. Surely, if there's something that can be done, and it might not be perfect, but at this stage, I would say, if you made it a bit more difficult for like 9 and 10-year-olds to get this, if you're packaging it up so it doesn't look like a sweetie or a candy, that is surely a good thing.
And here's one definite fringe benefit, which we can be sure of. I mean, apparently 8 vapes are chucked away every second in the UK. At last, I mean, I don't know about where you live, I walk down my local high street, there are vapes everywhere, in the gutter, on the pavement.
Along with these awful e-scooters.
Absolutely, along with them. That's a whole other subject.
Let's talk about banning them.
So at least it'll stop.
Look, my only fear is that it will basically push people to the refillable
That's
ones.
what I think. Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to exacerbate the problem.
It's interesting though. This is a measure that's been introduced by the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs because of the waste. This actually isn't a health measure officially today.
A bit of both.
This is the Circular Economy Minister, Mary Cray, says single-use vapes are extremely wasteful and blight our towns and cities, and just people throwing them away. And they're littered or thrown into general waste, and the equivalent of 8 being thrown away per second. In 2022, 40 tonnes of lithium from single-use vapes discarded, which is the same amount used to power 5,000
But different departments will have their own view. And what happens, you have a government right-round. The department will maybe comment on the policy. And the DEFRA are making that comment. But I'm sure health and West Streeting and different departments...
But it's just interesting that it's come about, under this kind of concept of a circular economy where we use resources for longer, reduce waste, accelerate the path to net zero, and create thousands of jobs across the country.
Yeah, I mean, those are the government talking points. I mean, we did that.
Sometimes there are very helpful unintended consequences.
Absolutely.
Now, look, at this time, pretty much to the minute yesterday morning, we were bringing you the news that Keir Starmer was on his plane, he was in the air on the way to the Commonwealth Conference, and he was telling all and sundry, anyone who'd listen, that there was not a problem with Donald Trump, simply because Labour are sending 100 staffers to America to support Kamala Harris's campaign. He said, no, nothing to see here. We got no problems with Starmer. I had dinner with him a couple of weeks ago. It's fine. Since then, Donald Trump has doubled down on this story. He's come out and he's accused and named 2 of the Prime Minister's senior aides of, quote, sticking their fingers into the US election. He's still very angry about it, and basically the writ still runs. The legal action still goes on.
On this, I think he's very, very cleverly saying, look, these foreigners, the Brits, are interviewing in our election, and that'll appeal to his base. I mean, I remember The Guardian tried to do this about 20 years ago. They wrote to people in Ohio and said, you've got to vote for the Democrats. And, of course...
And the Republicans won.
Of course they did. Of course they did. I mean, and that would happen here. I mean, I remember with the Brexit, I know it's a different thing, when Obama said you get back to...
It was annoying, wasn't it?
The Brexiteers were crying.
And he was right.
Well,
that was slightly inconvenient.
So the point was about foreign interference, and I think it backfires. It's more likely to backfire. And what Donald Trump has realised is, if I can make as much noise about this as possible, more people will know that, the Brits are trying to interfere with their election, and that will shore up my vote.
Does it have any impact, Aisha? I mean, what's the point of 100 staffers and activists from the Labour Party going over to campaign for Kamala? And in what way do they campaign? I mean, does a British sort of London-based Labour Party staffer knock on a door in Pennsylvania and say, we'd like you to vote for Kamala because Trump would be a terrible idea? And the person behind the door goes, My goodness, I just hadn't thought about. Now you put it like that. Yeah. I can't do an American accent, but I mean, it's just they're totally disconnected, aren't they?
I think we've got to take a step back now. I think there have been a number of stories about Labour which have been uncomfortable for somebody like me, but I think they've been justified.
You mean Freebiegate?
Yeah, all of those kind of things. I think I can understand the anger, and I think there has been something to see. Yeah, I think there have been some sort of really difficult moments. I do think this is absolutely ridiculous, this story. I do think this is making an absolute mountain out of a molehill. It is traditional that the Conservative Party in this country have a very close relationship with the Republicans, and the Labour Party has a very close relationship with the... Hang on,
OK, I'll let you finish.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
If you could answer the question, though, which is what effect does it have?
But this is... Let me kind of say what I want to say, and then I will get to that. This is, you know, we have had Liz Truss going out to do stuff with the Republicans. Bill Clinton famously came to a Labour Party conference. It was absolutely huge news. We are sister parties. You know, Margaret Thatcher had an incredibly close relationship with Ronald Reagan. And different people from different parties are really interested in big events that happen in other countries. So it's quite commonplace for people to go out and volunteer.
But these are Labour staffers.
And also the issue here...
No, they're going out and they're volunteers.
Yeah, but they're Labour staffers.
But of course, but you're likely, if you're interested in politics, you're likely to go out to something...
But Richard, the issue is...
I really do not see what
So I agree with you.
I do agree. I don't actually think if you're in Alabama or if you're in a swing state, somebody turning up from like Stepney Labour Party is not going to swing it for you. But remember, a lot of campaigning, Susanna, is not just going out, it's doing stuff like... So I know people for years that will... In fact, do you know, I know a lot of people, political nerds, who'll take holiday time to go and campaign in America. And they will stuff envelopes, they will do things like that.
The main issue isn't the fact that this happens, because it's been happening for years. The big issue is that Trump himself is making a big deal of this. And that says to me that it's backfiring. Because the fact that 100 or how many of these people, and I think Aisha's right, they've got sister parties, but the fact these people are doing it is being exploited by him for his own end.
He's been exploited he's exploiting everything.
It's not running that big as a story in the United States. It's much bigger here, and that's because of its potential effect on the relationship that we might have with America if Trump wins the election. Stephen Glover's headline in the Mail today, big headline, and if he was here, he'd say this: Labour's rank amateurishness and its call to arms against Trump is unforgivable, and if he wins, and this is the nub of it, isn't it? And if he wins the US election, there will be a price to pay.
Oh, for goodness sake. Do you know, I'm really sorry, Richard, but the idea...
I'm not saying that, I'm just quoting...
Oh, yeah, but you're quoting Daily Mail criticises Labour. Oh, my God, hold the front page. This is huge news, guys. Let's go into rolling news on this, because this is huge. But come on, we've all got to get a grip here.
They criticise Labour on the issues that you agree they should be criticised on.
They criticise Labour for literally drawing breath, Richard, and you know that. Look, come on, I think we... Listen...
But take the point.
If Donald Trump wins, there is going to be a whole set of issues which are way bigger than did 100 people. Look at his support for Ukraine. Or his non-support for Ukraine. Trust me, this is.
But he bears grudges, doesn't he?
He does.
Well, listen.
It will affect our relationship 100%.
But if Donald Trump wins, we are going to have bigger problems. In fact, the whole world is going to have bigger problems on its hands. So I would just urge a bit of a reality check here. I understand that people are going nuts about the story, but genuinely, this is not... there are even Conservative commentators who are out there saying this is a non-story. Okay, so I think we've got to have a sense of perspective.
It's only a story because he's making it a story.
Yeah, Trump's very clever at making things which aren't a story.
Listen, he accused people of eating dogs and cats not that long ago.
And so that cut through.
But Susanna, there's one thing about, in a world of misinformation, we as the mainstream media have got a responsibility to not just pump out utter nonsense.
He could be the next president. It's not utter nonsense.
He may well be.
Pronouncements from someone who was president.
No. The two things are different. You can be president and you can say nonsense.
Yes.
When he was president, he talked about injecting bleach. OK, that does not make it right.
No. I know.
But the problem is
the trouble is, you do end up reporting what President Trump says because he's been president.
But we can also do some critical thinking ourselves.
I don't think we can be accused of not doing critical thinking.
No, but on this, genuinely, we've literally just had people like Liz Truss and others going out to do... We've had Nigel Farage spending vast amounts... He's not even spending time in his constituency. He's spending more time. And now he's criticising the Labour Party for people in their own time going to stuff them.
There's an element of hypocrisy in politics, are you?
Perish the thought.
For me, the main issue is that if he wins, I think this will affect his reaction
at least temporarily. At
to the
least
Labour
temporarily.
government.
Let's talk
100%.
about...
I think the biggest thing is when
okay.
he withdraws support for Ukraine. That is going to be a
Well, we don't know
big
he's
issue.
going to do that.
Yeah,
Let's see.
there's no doubt
There's
there are
every
bigger
chance.
international issues. That doesn't make this not an issue, though.
No,
But
exactly.
this is a big issue. So Keir Starmer is going to face down demands to pay compensation for Britain's role in the slave trade. Of course, it's the key Commonwealth summit today. He said something rather important on this. He would rather work with countries affected by slavery on future-facing challenges than spend a lot of time on the past. Now, Kwasi, this feels like quite an important statement.
Yeah, I don't know where... I mean, I've always, given my background, given my interest in the history of the empire...
Can you remind us of your background?
Well, my parents came to Britain in the 1960s from Ghana, and before that it was called the Gold Coast.
Yes.
And it's West Africa, where there was a lot of slavery. I mean, there was trading in slaves, in human beings. So it's something that I'm interested in, and also I'm interested in the history of the British Empire and the Commonwealth. Sure. My own view is that we shouldn't look back, because how would you calculate the reparations? And it was a terrible period. Now, more than 200 years ago, I mean, the slave trade was abolished and slavery was abolished in 1833, nearly 200 years ago. So how you calculate the number is very difficult and very contested. So I agree with the Prime Minister when he's saying he's looking forward. And we do help a lot of developing countries that were adversely devastated by the slave trade through the aid budget and through our commitment as Britain to help people in other parts of the world. We commit billions, actually, in the aid budget across the world. And so his point about saying we've got to look forward, I think is a fair point. But at the same time, you've got to acknowledge in some way, but I don't think through reparations, the harm that was done.
And there's the question of precedent, isn't there? If we were to pay reparations to one country, it would absolutely open...
It opens up a whole can of worms.
What do you think on this?
So I'm really torn on this, and I do accept a lot of the arguments that you've made. I just feel that even though slavery was abolished a long time, I think that there's a very long tail that slavery has cast on subsequent generations. I think there is I genuinely do believe in inherited trauma throughout the ages. I don't think slavery just stopped back in the day. If you look at how slavery and what happened in America carried on, we were civil rights movement and the Jim Crow laws. I mean, I've just been to see a film called Nickel Boys, which is coming out soon. The idea that and if you look at kind of structural inequalities that have affected communities whose, even not that long ago in their family trees where slavery was a thing. So I understand when people say, it stopped 200 years ago, but I think it casts a great shadow over subsequent...
Do you take into account the fact that it was Britain that abolished the slave trade, and it was Britain that enforced the abolition of the slave trade by force at sea?
Yes, but also Britain really filled its boots off slavery as well, Richard. So two things.
I know that,
but no, of course, I do, but I also do think this country, and my parents are from India, and of course, India had a big connection with Britain as well, with the empire, and basically sucking loads of assets out of a country like India back in the day, and then partition and things like that. So I just think you have to take a nuance, but you have to take a kind of a holistic view. Yes, of course, Wilberforce. I went to Hull University, big statue of Wilberforce in the centre of the great city of Hull. Yes, but let's not kid ourselves. This country grew rich off the back of the blood of a lot of people of colour around the world. But I do agree, a lot of it is about looking forward. By the way, some countries don't want specific reparations, but they want sort of better trading relations now.
Yeah,
they want
that makes sense.
And they want kind of... So it's... But just one thing, some companies and some families, like Laura Trevelyan, for example, they themselves are making the decision to pay some reparations. So people take different views on it.
The estimates for the likely reparations bill for British involvement in slavery in 14 countries range from £206 billion to £19 trillion.
Exactly, it's a huge range.
Where do you
work that out? So
stop?
that's 100 times. 19 trillion is almost 100 times more than 200 billion. And that's the point. I mean, how would you calculate that?
And he says, so Keir Starmer said, slavery is abhorrent. That's one thing we can all agree on. But he'd rather roll up his sleeves and work with the countries affected on these challenges in the future, and he uses this phrase, rather than what will end up being very, very long, endless discussions about reparations.
I don't know how you calculate
because
it.
at some point, no one's going to be satisfied.
No. That's right.
Presumably. And if you can acknowledge the damage that has been caused and may still, as you say, systemically be being caused to these countries, and then fix
I think that's
those
smart. I
huge
think that's
problems.
But I think sometimes, look, I do get that, and I'm accepting that that is a very valid argument. But I think that question of, oh, it's really, really difficult to do, means that nothing is done. And if you look at how we have cut our overseas development aid budget over years to help a lot of countries, which formerly we did colonial stuff on. So I think sometimes we use that excuse to not move forward.
All right, well, let's move on. And talking of moving forward, we have some movement from the Home Secretary yesterday about anonymity for police gunmen, as it were, who shoot to kill and do kill and get prosecuted. They will have their anonymity protected unless they are convicted. This is, of course, off the back of the case, which has made all the headlines in the last few days. Seems to me to be a positive move.
I think that's very fair, because obviously the fact that this man's name, the policeman in the Garraway incident, it was broadcast all through the newspapers. So anyone who's an associate of the person who was unfortunately killed knows exactly who pulled the trigger, as it were, even though he's not guilty. And I'm afraid he could well be a target for revenge attacks. I mean, those are the reports that we're seeing.
Well, he apparently has gone into hiding.
That's right.
And there's a £10,000 bounty allegedly from the gang involved for information as to where he is.
Yeah, those are the reports.
Yeah.
What do you think, Aisha? I mean, there's no change in holding police officers accountable. And one of the things that was suggested yesterday by police chiefs was that officers in these situations should be given more protection. That didn't change yesterday from the announcement by the Home Secretary. But it does seem to be, if you are somebody in this situation, particularly a police officer, that the naming of this police officer, which I think came as a shock when his name was revealed in March, because I think a lot of people felt, well, he's going to be targeted at some stage. That will now change. Police officers won't be. So I think in these specific circumstances.
Yeah, I think this is the right thing to do for the reasons that Kwasi has set out. It's also worth saying that when that police officer was named, there was petitions from, I think, pretty much every major newspaper that was pushing, every media outlet was pushing for his name.
It was a campaign by media organisations.
Exactly.
And I think it was wrong, actually.
And it was done by a judge, by the way.
Right.
That his name was revealed.
So I think this is the right thing. I think this is the right thing. There's no winners in this case, right? This was an awful case. Clearly, this guy, Chris Cabba, was part of a gang doing absolutely sort of terrible things. I do feel for his family, but I also really feel for what this police officer's been through. Look, the police have gone through a terrible time. For many parts of the community, they just don't trust the police. I, as a woman, by the way, still feel very nervous after Wayne Couzens and, many young women, Sarah Everard.
Which, by the way, happened just around the corner, in the same area of South London.
I live in Brixton. I live very near all of this. By the way, in Stockwell, Charles de Gaulle Menendez, he got shot at Stockwell Station as well. That was a very famous case of a police marksman shooting somebody. So, look, you have to have these checks and balances. Now, you've got to get the right balance, right? You have to have policing by consent. You can't have the police above the law, but you also need good men and women to step forward and be police officers.
Yeah, they've had a tough time.
And I have a lot of time for, I think it's very easy just to slag the police office, and, my goodness, they get it wrong a lot of the time. But where I live in Lambeth right now, there are huge pressures on policing. There's huge pressures on crime and antisocial behaviour. You want good men and women to come forward and do the right job, but you need the right checks and balances.
Shall we finish our discussion this morning with a tribute to a really remarkable man who it feels like was a part of all of our childhoods. And this is Jeff.
We're showing our age.
Well, I'd say young adulthood in my case.
So, two-time world's strongest man and British shot put record holder, Jeff Cape, died at the age of 75. Giant heart, huge spirit, of course, Jeff Capes. Spent his career breaking records, a 3-time Olympian, a shot putter, won gold twice at the Commonwealth Games, and European Indoor Championships. And his British record for shot put remains unbeaten to this day.
He's remembered for so much, isn't he? I mean, not just for his stature. He was 6'5". He weighed 27 stone.
Oh, my goodness.
Incredible. His victories made him a household name, obviously, but his legacy was actually in coaching aspiring athletes in his very long retirement. But his pursuits were way beyond sport. He won the Highland Games 6 times. He served, I love this, he served as the president of the Budgerigar Society because he was a Budgerigar breeder. It was almost a non sequitur, wasn't it? But it was real.
But it added into the gentle giant image, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah.
And you know how he began to develop his strength initially? He worked on a farm, I think it was in Norfolk. He was the go-to guy on the farm if you wanted anything really heavy lifting, particularly sacks of spuds. Huge sacks of spuds that nobody else could lift. Jeff, can you move them? And throw them over the shoulder, and off he went with them.
I thought it was amazing. As a Scot, I used to love the Highland Games, and we almost felt he was Scottish. He was like an honorary Scot. Yeah. And the other thing I always remember growing up as a wee girl is, you know, watching World's Strongest Man, like on just after Christmas.
Yeah.
It was like Christmas was like eating loads of sweets and watching the World's Strongest Man.
Yeah, very much part of our growing up in the 80s, and we all remember that. Yeah. I mean, I spoke to some of the people backstage; they didn't know who he was.
No, I know it's very much a generational divide.
It is a generational thing, but he was a great man.
That's when you realise you're getting older, isn't it? Kwasi, Aisha, thank you so much.
Thank you both.